And welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm your host, Paul DiRienzo, and we have another great show in store for you. You can see from the photograph on behind me, we're going to talk about Have a Marijuana, recorded live on the Lower East Side by David Peel and his band, the Lower East Side. We're going to talk about David Peel, my good friend, who was a guest here once, passed away last year. And we have his good friend, Koshek, Swaminathan. Welcome. Glad to have you here on Let Them Talk. And we're going to spend the next 28 minutes talking about our good friend David Peel, who you're a musician, you played with him, and so welcome.
Thank you very much.
Glad to have you here.
It's a pleasure.
So, Koshek, you just had, last week I was at a beautiful event. Tell us a little bit about the event that happened at the Sidewalk Cafe last week.
Well, we did a birthday bash for David Peel.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of David's friends want to keep his memory alive. So we decided to do events, at least 2 a year, because he had so much, there's like a lot of history around David Peel. And a lot of us talked about how it seemed like, the entire city changed after David passed away. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that feeling of what the city was like is also fading away. So we wanted to actually bring some of that feeling back in any way we could. So we did these events.
Great. And so basically musicians who were inspired by David played, bands and musicians played various songs.
Oh, yes. We had some very good musicians. Alan Merrill, who wrote the song I Love Rock and Roll. Sea Monster.
I love rock and roll.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
that song. And Sea Monster.
Sea Monster were great.
Yes.
They were really hot.
Yes.
They were great.
That was.
I want to get one of their CDs. Well, nobody gets CDs. We were just discussing that. Where do you get music nowadays? On the internet somewhere, right?
Yes. I guess you download it.
Yeah, or you get it from like Spotify or one of these services, Pandora or something.
Well, that's what I've been doing. Is I don't buy anything. I just have an account with Spotify.
Yeah. That's what people do now. Just listen, like radio for yourself. But we'll talk about the music industry and how that changed and the influence that our friend David Peel had on the music industry.
Yes.
And he had a tremendous influence. People don't want to talk about it, but he John Lennon and others were inspired by him. Major musicians. How did you meet David Peel?
I met David Peel the same year, within a few months after John Lennon passed away. Now this probably gives away my age, but I was very young. I was probably 13 years old. And John Lennon just passed away. They had this big event in Central Park. Mm-hmm. And actually, I don't think David Peel actually performed there, but he was just a guy who just started playing guitar. And he had
As usual, he brought his guitar everywhere he went.
Yes, exactly.
Or he grabbed somebody else's if it was around, right?
Yeah. Well, he had a bunch of friends, and they're all singing and stuff. And people are saying, this man is a friend of John Lennon's. And I just thought that was like, I thought that was a put on. I mean, it's like, because like it was like John Lennon just passed away, and so I knew nothing about David Peel. Eventually, we became friends. It took, he I asked David where I could find him. He kept on saying, well, find me in the park. I'll just be in the park. I'll be in Washington Square Park.
Washington Square Park, right?
Washington Square Park, those days, it was 1980. So Washington Square Park and Central Park.
On the sheep meadow.
Yes.
Still.
Yes.
Nice. Not with David, but with others who followed in his footsteps.
Yeah.
Great. So you met him, and then did you develop a friendship right away, or later on, or?
It was not. It was more like I was in awe of this person, and I would go out, to because there's life around him. Every time you hung out with him, there was like a lot of things happening.
I guess you're from New York. You were raised in Manhattan or New York City?
No. At the time that I met David Peel, I was living in Middletown, New Jersey. I was one of the bridge and tunnel people coming into New York.
Right.
And every time I came to New York, I wanted to do something exciting.
Okay.
And I knew exactly where, the exciting things to do were.
Right, up behind the band shell.
Yes.
That was famous back in those days anyway. I don't know, maybe he still is. I don't know if it is.
Yeah.
Right, okay, great. So there's places to hang out, and of course in Washington Square Park, anybody can remember. It's a little different today. It's still a fun park, but back in those days, you'd have a folk music scene almost at every At every
Yes.
little station around the park, there would be another musician, like a guru of the guitar, strumming away with a bunch of people singing one or another sing-along songs. Whether it's teach your children or whatever.
There was an amazing vibe in Washington Square Park.
Yeah.
That vibe doesn't exist anymore.
No.
I don't know why. I don't know. Is it the university that did
It's
it?
a
or
college
what?
quad now.
Yes.
It became a college quad.
But it changed, and I think that's what a lot of people, they don't realize. They hang out in New York City and they don't realize how much fun New York City really was at one time.
Yes.
I mean, it was just a really amazing place.
Right.
There was a lot of live culture. Just anywhere you turned, there was something going on that was really amazing and interesting.
Right. And so, at one point, did you start playing music with David?
Well, this happened much later. I'd see David, I'd meet David, and then for like a few years I won't see him, and then I'd see him, and it was really strange because like I would get introduced by, I'd come back into the scene with David again and again.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it would be like I would bump into him again. Something we'd just walk in the street. It's like David. It's like
And you wound up hanging out with him.
Yes.
Going to wherever he was going.
Yes.
And with his guitar, great.
Right. And then he knew that I was involved with electronic music. I was throwing parties at a place called Save the Robots.
Okay,
And yes, so I did late night parties with DJs.
It was an after-hours club on Avenue B for you.
Yes, it was an after-hours club in Avenue B.
Right.
This was back in the 90s.
Right.
And I used to just invite him to these parties. And I used to have a party that was all electronic bands. There was something at that time called the ambient scene. So I was promoting a lot of bands in this ambient scene.
Okay.
Ambient, electronic.
Ambient.
Yes.
Like Illin.
Yes.
Illin ambient. That's the 90s for you. Right.
Yeah, ill. Well, anyway, so I invited David to a lot of these parties. He never went.
No.
Not once. I put him on the guest list, everything. He never went. And but
Not a clubber, really. I never
no,
knew.
he wasn't a clubber.
No, not really.
I mean, he had his own thing going on, his own scene,
Yeah.
his own. But somebody did one of his songs. They used a sample from one of his songs. Actually, it was "I Like Marijuana."
Right. Was that the rap group, the marijuana rap group, Cypress Hill? Was that Cypress Hill?
No, it wasn't. It was another band. Now, it just escapes my mind.
That's all right.
The
I remember that
name
same
of the
thing
song
happened
is
with Cypress Hill. Only he made them pay money.
Yes.
He didn't. He was a businessman, right? I mean,
Right. Well,
he was a good businessman when it came to his art.
He had a very good lawyer who made sure that he got money for a song called "I Want to Be a Hippie," which is a sample of his song "I Like Marijuana," and it was turned into a strange dance song, and electronic dance song, and it became a gold record.
Oh wow!
And he was excited about this. So when he saw me one day, he was like, "You're the person I want to talk to," because he wanted to do something called Piltronica.
I see.
Which is like electronic dance music.
A new area. So that was David, right? There was nothing that he didn't think he would try. I mean, let's go through, like, this is his first album, right, with the Lower East Side, his band, the Lower East Side. It was Have a Marijuana. This is, what, 1967 or something? 1968, right? And this is his first album. It's terribly ahead of its time. It's amazingly ahead of its time, this album, because it's singing about marijuana and things like that. There weren't a lot of songs. It's not like today where everything's marijuana, it's in the media and television and everything. Yeah. Back then it was very underground. I mean, where people smoked it, but they didn't talk about it, and they didn't do it in public usually. And so he was really out there with this band. I mean, that was a controversial thing to do in 1968.
It was.
Marijuana, I'm old and I'm dating myself, but let's say in 1968, as much as people were smoking marijuana, the public attitude towards it was as the worst thing in the world, and that the people who did it were the worst people in the world. They were bringing it to children, and this was as bad as heroin, and people just saw it all, lumped it together as drugs. And there were the people who did drugs and the people who didn't. So to put this album out there to make a stand on the people who use drugs. Like drugs are like to raise your drug flag for the whole world to see. Where do you think David Peel got the courage to be like that?
He always seemed rather. He loves controversy.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure like what drove him to do things like that, but he would just make more and more controversy. He loved attention. He loved grabbing attention from a lot of people. He was very charismatic, and he also, like, a lot of lyrics say things like LSD's got a hold on me.
Yeah, right.
Which is really funny because LSD, how does it have a hold on anybody? You know, it's like
right.
It's not like heroin. Or
a lot of it was just the poetry of it, just the rhymes.
Yes. A lot of it was the rhymes, and I think he was also at that time. The
Pope smokes dope.
Yes.
It had nothing to do with the Pope smoking dope. What did he care about? He thought the Pope was Mickey Caesar.
Right.
Right. Damn, that was the Pope. This pot dealer is long dead, named Mickey Caesar. So the Pope smokes dope was a double meaning to David.
Yes.
His buddy, the Pope, Mickey Caesar,
right,
and the Pope in Rome, since he was raised, I think he's Puerto Rican, probably raised Catholic, right? And so that was the joke. It was a double entendre, and the Pope smokes dope, of course, is funny.
Yes.
Right. That kind of. So he was a smart guy.
He
Clever.
was. Yes.
Or people often misunderstood him or underestimated him because, he didn't always have the clearest diction. He talked really fast. It was hard. You had to have him repeat himself sometimes to understand him if you first met him. He had so many things going through his mind all at once. Did you find that people misunderstood him or underestimated him?
Yes. He was like, he told me that he's far too radical for anyone to understand. He's very radical.
Yeah.
A lot of times.
Real 60s. That's a 60s thing to say.
Yes.
I'm too radical to understand. that was like what people used to say, right? That meant you were into it. Yeah. Right. Great. So then you start playing with him, right? You actually started playing.
Yes, because we were going to do this album called Peeltronica, and actually this was back in 1996, and this was the beginning of a weekly phone call from David Peel. Now, it's like sometimes I didn't look forward to these weekly phone calls because he had to have a weekly phone call with me, even if we weren't working on the project.
Right.
And he would spend maybe an hour on the phone talking about all kinds of stuff,
right,
which was
like
unrelated.
Stream of consciousness. Yeah.
But it would be about, according to him, it was about the Peeltronica album. And then we would get together and work on, spend a day working on the album.
Right.
This went on for years.
Yeah, when I met him, because I bought this album that's on when I was like in high school.
Have a Marijuana.
Yeah. And I bought Lower East Side as well. The Revolution, American Revolution. Right. So I bought both those albums, and in those days, I tell the story. Those are the days when you had the big stereo console in the living room that often had the TV in it, and the record player, and it was one big box.
Yes.
Wood with like doors that slid open and everything like that.
My parents had one. Yes.
Right, one of those things, and a really like old-fashioned like turntable, a big heavy needle, and I was home alone and playing it, and got distracted by a phone call or something and forgot about it, and left the record on the turntable, and my uncle came in one day, and he looked at the record and he just turned it on, the stereo, and it started playing. Up against the wall, mother. It was blasting through the house. I would say it. This is a children's family show. Up against the wall, mother. Echoing through my house, my parents' house. My uncle was mad. He was like, "What's going on with this? This is horrible. Destroy. Get it out of the house." And I met David. I knew David, of course, and I met him at 9 Bleecker Street, the Yippie Museum. Well, back then, Dana Beale's house. And I walked in and I saw, somebody said, "That's David Peel." And I said, "David Peel, I almost got kicked out of your house by one of those because I played your album. I left your album on my stereo." And he looked at me like an angry look, and he goes, "You know how many people tell me that?" So we were friends ever since that point. And so I knew him. And he used to come out. I used to have a place way over on Avenue D. And he'd come over and we'd play music. And, you know, I'd play on the stereo. I had a nice stereo. He liked that. I had a nice stereo with big speakers and a turntable. So he'd come over and we'd all sit around and smoke weed and play music. Just hang out and plot the revolution.
Right.
With him, it was always like that. He was very political. He's always wanted to plot the next demonstration, the next move, the next protest. He always wanted to do that.
Yes, he did.
What motivated him? Because he was very radical, but he was a proud American. He was in the army and all those things. He never saw himself as not an American or not part of it.
Yes.
He never treated himself as the outsider. He was in it.
Yes.
To win it. He was in it to win it. He wanted to win it.
Well, he's very complicated. I think in terms of politics, he's a very complicated person. He's not very simple.
Yeah.
He believes very strong. He believed very strongly in protest, and protesting the system. He was always against war, legalization.
He was in the army. He was a veteran in the army.
Yes.
Not a combat veteran, but he knew what the army was like. That's for sure. Yeah.
But you know, he's so I think it's very hard to say like where he stands, where he actually stood with politics, because sometimes if there was a charismatic figure like Howard Stern, and he became friends with Howard Stern, he suddenly became a libertarian for a while. Then he gave that up after a few years, and then he became, you know, back to a liberal. And
well, it's funny because he was at Occupy, and then Trump got elected. And at first, when I asked him about Trump, he whispered to me, "I'm from New York, man. Trump's my boy because you know he's from New York."
Yes.
But it wasn't long after that I saw him playing music against Trump.
Yes. Yes,
right?
Well, that was his. He did want to protest Trump after Trump was elected.
Right before he was elected, didn't see him as the enemy so much.
He was so anti-Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
That I think that there's a lot of people. There are a lot of people who are going to say that he voted for Trump. Nobody knows who he voted for. And I think that you could bet your bottom dollar that he would be totally against Trump.
Yes,
because
I remember him being.
He was very patriotic towards Puerto Rico for whatever reason, and he also took offense to anybody who said things against Puerto Ricans. But he would never take the offense on their face. He would take it afterwards. He would say, you know.
Yes, and so the idea that they let all those people die in the flood there in the hurricane, and then threw toilet paper at the President of the United States went down and tormented the people during a flood by throwing toilet paper at them, you know, he would have seen through that as a horrific thing, insulting, horrific thing, a racist thing.
Yes,
but now we all know, and by this point it's pretty clear where Trump is coming from. I mean, if you don't think Trump's a racist, then the person who doesn't think he's a racist is a racist. It's a good definition of a racist is, Trump's not a racist. No, but you are. Right? Right, and so he would have come, but there was a certain the Clintons were a powerful force for a long time, and they were anti-drug, and they war on crime, and
they were anti-drug. They were pro-war. There were a lot of reasons for him to be against Clinton.
Yeah,
we argued about it because I was pro-Clinton because I just saw Trump as the enemy
right from the beginning. Right,
but he saw Trump as someone who's going to shake things up. And we could protest Trump. And then he was like, you can't protest Hillary Clinton because she's a woman president. And you can't protest Obama because he's a black president, but he could throw all the bombs he wants.
That's interesting. That's an interesting analysis. It would be easier to protest if you had Trump as president.
Yes, but I don't think he totally underestimated how much Trump would do. I mean, I think everybody underestimated
that he would be
damage.
like Hitler. I mean, he would rise to the level of like Hitler overnight, like that, or Mussolini. Or
something. Yes, I mean using racism.
Nobody saw that coming.
Nobody saw that.
Yeah, no. Overnight he was like Hitler, because that's who supported him. That was in the end, you know, he is what a politician is. Whoever his base is, and that's his base. So he feeds them. That's what keeps them in power.
Yes.
So let's talk about. That's good. We can talk about. It's fun to talk about Trump, but. So I remember seeing him at Occupy all the time. David Peel.
Yes.
He was down there. He was running the drum circle at Occupy. Did you hang out with him at the Occupy Wall Street? Was the occupation for 2 or 3 months of a park near Wall Street on Broadway by folks who were protesting the Wall Street, obviously, the meltdown that robbed people of all their life savings and all that kind of thing. And he would be there every day running the drum circle at one end of the park by Church Street or Chambers Street or whatever, right? Church Street over there.
I used to say hello to him. I didn't get involved with that part of Occupy Wall Street, the drum circle. I was involved with Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah.
I was involved in art shows and in other levels with people involved in Occupy Wall Street, but I didn't do the music thing, which was pretty much what he was about and that group of people.
Right. And using music as a protest. I mean, he was totally into the protest, right?
Yes.
Right. Okay, so is there anything where I know you have some notes that you brought here about things you want to talk about?
Yes, actually, I do have a website that I created. There was a group of people, friends of David Peel. We all got together one day, and we started telling stories about what David Peel stories.
Yes.
And I think that this is like if there's a historian and he wanted to look back at an era of New York City, and he wanted to get a feel of what this period was like, one of the people that he would want to study is David Peel, and the things that the world that surrounded David Peel.
Sure. So and David Peel, I mean, so people, David was on this show. He talked about it. It was a long time ago. You can find it on my YouTube site. If you go to youtube.com/letemtalk, LETEMTALK, and search David Peel, you'll find the episode he was on where he told a story about him and John Lennon. And that's one of the most amazing stories, I mean, to me, that when he tells a story about how the FBI confused David Peel for John Lennon.
Right.
Does John Lennon to you, I mean, does David Peel to you, did Koshek, Swaminathan, did he look to you like John Lennon when you saw David Peel? Or did John Lennon look like David Peel? You never saw that. You didn't see it.
I never saw it, but I know that that he was. This is the FBI mixed it up. I don't know why.
And they followed David Peel around, thinking they were following John Lennon.
Yes.
And there was an FBI file. He used to show everybody, right? A box, I don't know, about that thick or something.
Yeah.
That he would show everybody in his house.
Yes. Yeah. But anyway, so I created this website where anybody could put stories about David Peel. This is the website that's up right now. It's called the actual website is eastvillagegazette.com/the Rock Street Journal.
And that was, he always talked about the Rock Street Journal. That was David's, his dream was to have a regular newspaper called the Rock Street Journal.
Actually, he did a few Rock Street Journals, and then I don't know what happened. But when I put together this website, I decided to call it the Rock Street Journal. And so a bunch of friends were talking about this. Why don't we make a website where people can put their stories up about David Peel? Because this could be a historical record for people in the future to actually go back and see what life was like in New York City, who this person David Peel was, why he was so iconic, why he embodied a lot of the protest movement, the underground movement, punk rock, and like what made him like such an important figure.
But let's talk about punk rock. That's interesting because he did do this album. He did a number of these almost like self-published albums, a stream of them after a while. And one of them was The King of Punk, which was David Peel's head under a skull and crossbones.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, he was the skull and there was crossbones under him. And it was, he styled himself as the originator of punk. Now that was very controversial when that it came out in the late 1970s, right? Here was a hippie, a guy who liked the Beatles, claiming he was the king of punk.
If you go back to his second album, American Revolution, it sounds like a punk album. Before there was punk, it has the simple guitar parts. It has the
couple of chords, 2 chords, 3 chords.
2 chord, 3 chord.
Yeah.
It has it's all electric.
Yeah.
It's the words are very much like punk, which is like the original punk was very violently protesting the establishment.
It was, and so was the early hip hop too.
Yes.
Hip hop and punk in its early days was very much came out of the '60s culture. Although it was different, it was a rejection of sort of maybe the more countrified direction things are going in. and because there was too many protests. I mean, we don't have a lot of time, but there was a lot of protests. The bands were afraid sometimes to put on shows because they would end in violence or fighting in the streets. So they started taking on like the Dead and the Airplane, a more countrified sort of style, calming everything down. But David Peel went the other direction.
Yes.
He kept going in the more hard direction.
I would say that that's probably the first real punk album. I mean, there are a lot of people who say MC5 and so forth, but
Kick Out the Jams and stuff like that.
But when you listen to all these records and you listen to that record, it sounds punk.
Yeah. Okay, and that's his other album, the second one with this group. Now, who were the Lower East Side, the band that he played with?
The original Lower East Side were Harold C. Black and Billy Joe White. And they did 2 albums together. He did a third album called The Pope Smokes Dope, and they may have been on that album too.
Right, playing on that album.
Yes.
I see. Are these albums out there? Are they available?
Yes, all 3 of those albums are available. And I would say that the first 3 albums are basically they're the albums that made David Peel. This is the reason why he's remembered today by a lot of musicians, because they're the ones that sold a lot.
Yeah.
The first album sold more than 500,000 copies.
I had it in my house, as I said. It was an amazing album. This one right here, right?
Yes.
And it had a picture of marijuana. That was so, even today that's controversial. You don't see that every day.
No.
A picture of marijuana on the cover of your album. In 1968, that was like in your face. I'm surprised they didn't kick down his door and arrest him right there, the FBI.
Yeah, I know.
That was enough in those days. That was advocating drugs, you know. That was it. There was no like debate in those days.
Yeah.
The marijuana, there wasn't a marijuana legalization movement like we know it today. It was totally underground.
Right.
And if a cop, well, New York was always pretty cool, to be honest with you. The cops sort of turned their back to it, but in many places in America, if they smelled it, they'd be like the riot squad would be kicking down your door just for smelling it. So he had a lot of courage. I have to give him that. It's amazing to me, his courage. We have half a minute. What do you, Koshek, Swaminathan, finish up?
Okay, yes. Well, if anybody has stories about David Peel, I would like to invite them to give their stories to
the Rock Street Journal.
The Rock Street Journal, the website, because we're gonna make make this into a public record. You can be a part of history by telling your story, and I invite you as well to tell your story.
All right, great. I'll be happy.
Well.
I have a story I'll send to you.
Yes, great.
Right, great.
Yes, it could be in any form, video.
Koshek, Swaminathan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much,
again. All right, take care. See you next week. That's it.